For 5, 6, almost 7 decades, European decision makers had a good reason to believe that America was going to be present in Europe. The 4 years of the Trump administration have, of course, created significant doubt.
Hello and welcome to G-Zero World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today a look at the road ahead for the United States and Europe. Transatlantic relations have been badly strained over the past 4 years, but President-elect Joe Biden is promising America is back on the global stage. What does that mean in reality? And how does China factor into the new geopolitical landscape? I'm talking about that and more with one of Europe's top diplomats, Wolfgang Ischinger. He's former German ambassador to the United States and currently the chairman of the Munich Security Conference. The title of his new book says it all: World in Danger. If only there were really such a thing as a reset button. You remember 2009, then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton famously presented one to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
We want to reset our relationship. And
Let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
Right now, that notion of a reset is being floated yet again, this time from European leaders who are optimistic that President-elect Joe Biden will turn around tensions created by 4 years of a Trump presidency. That the push of a button can take the dynamic from this,
I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade,
to this.
America is back, ready to lead the world, not retreat from it.
Biden's track record points in that direction. He's had years of experience on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, including serving as its chairman, and he has long-standing personal relations with most of Europe's top leaders and diplomats as vice president.
I think he said it quite well. He says, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships.
But America's relationship status with Europe is complicated. As EU leaders gathered for a year-end summit in Brussels, repairing the bridge to Washington was high on the agenda. And on some issues, they are set to see action quickly, like climate change. Biden will re-enter the Paris Accord. Pandemic response. He's pledged to return the United States to the World Health Organization. Then, there are stickier subjects, like how to approach China, an economic powerhouse that's a deep trade partner for several European nations, including Germany. And changing dynamics in the EU itself as Poland, Hungary, and candidate member Turkey all become problem children. Not to mention the UK Brexits its way out starting January 1. There's also the matter of trust. As political divisions in the United States only continue to grow, foreign leaders are questioning how long their one-time most committed ally will stay committed to renewed multilateralism. I discussed all of this with one of Europe's most accomplished diplomats, Wolfgang Ischinger, and he candidly described the realities across the Atlantic. Here's that conversation. And I'm here with Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger. He is chairman of the Munich Security Conference and author of the new book, World in Danger, Germany and Europe in an Uncertain Time. Wolfgang, great to be with you.
It's great to be with you, Ian.
Well, let me start with the new administration. You were very quick to congratulate President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris on their win. Even extended an invite to him to the Munich conference. I know he's attended for many decades now. To what extent do you think this will really reflect a change in the trust that the Europeans do and don't have for the United States?
I think there is a wonderful, a positive opportunity waiting to be seized now because, of course, we have had a really regrettable loss of trust in the transatlantic cooperation. I cannot think of anyone better equipped because of his long-standing personal relationship with so many European leaders. I cannot think of anyone better equipped than your future president to try to repair the trust thing. So I think that's going to work very well. And I also believe that there are a number of what you would call low-hanging fruit just as one example, a return by the United States of America to the Paris climate deal and future joint enterprises in the climate arena. I think that's going to produce a sea change in the way Europeans look at America. And we will be so pleased if we are no longer being called a foe of America, but a partner. Maybe sometimes a difficult one, maybe sometimes not always an extremely pleasant one, but actually a good one.
Is it fair to say that there's likely to be an actual honeymoon, a transatlantic honeymoon, for a period of time between the Americans and Europeans?
I certainly believe so, but there's a big but. I've been saying to my German and European friends, curb your enthusiasm. Don't now sit back and wait for President Biden and his future administration to bring all the goodies to Europe. That's probably not going to happen. We will have to bring something to the United States. We will have to talk about equitable burden sharing. We will have to talk and to make offers on such issues as trade and on how best to deal with China. But Ian, let me add one important point. For 5, 6, almost 7 decades, European decision makers had a good reason to believe that America was going to be present in Europe, was a European power. The 4 years of the Trump administration have, of course, created significant doubt. And this doubt is not going to go away completely because Europeans are not dumb. You know, they are now thinking, do we have a guarantee that 4 years from now, the American voter may not vote into office someone like Donald Trump again, and then we would be back to square one. In other words, there is an element of doubting the reliability of the American ally. And that's going to be really hard to repair for any administration.
Did Trump do that much? I mean, he said a lot of things that were deeply antagonistic to the Europeans. He moved some troops out of Germany, you know, he had some more forward deployments to Poland. The Russia sanctions are still kind of the Russia sanctions. How much of this is bark and no bite?
Well, you know, politics and international relations, of course, is about money, it's about military cooperation, it's about guarantees, it's about trade. But it is also about symbols. It just so happens that from a German viewpoint, America is not just any partner. America, the White House, represented to us in the post-World War II period the wisdom and the values of what we call the West. America was for us, and hopefully will again be, the leading power of the West, representing these shared values of human dignity, etc. And quite frankly, the last 4 years, in the minds of many, many of my countrymen, America lost the ability to lead the West. If you look at recent polls taken in Germany, taken in other European countries, the Pew Research poll that I'm sure you've seen, the results have been rather devastating. I think that can be repaired. It will be repaired. The mood, the views of Europeans can change quickly again, but that has really affected in a very, very negative way our relationship, above and beyond, you know, the substantive issues which are, of course, the core of the relationship. But symbols matter.
Another massive change in the last 4 years has been China's growing role in Europe, particularly in Eastern and Southern Europe. How is that changing Europe, both its orientation in the world and its future?
For decades, we in my country, in Germany, we tended to regard China as a market, where we can sell the maximum number of Mercedes and Volkswagens and BMWs, and that was it. We have now started over the last few years to discover that if we want to defend our interests, we need to consider not only human rights issues, we need to consider intellectual property issues, we need to consider security issues, and we need to work with the United States on this. So I think that actually we are, on the European side, we are interested and willing to try to coordinate with the United States. There is one big obstacle for us at this moment. We don't yet really have something which deserves to be called a EU-China strategy. There is a French-China strategy, there is to some extent a German strategy on China, and maybe a British and Italian strategy on China. Putting this together and presenting to our American partner something which deserves to be called an EU approach to China, and consult with the United States about, where is overlap, where can we work together, how can we develop joint initiatives on so many different issues in China. I think that's the big issue.
Do you think it is more true that the United States has been too hawkish on China, or that the Europeans have been too dovish on China? What's your personal view?
My personal view is that as far as China is concerned, I would actually give a few bonus points to the Trump administration, because by adopting this rather confrontational position on China, that sort of had the effect of a wake-up call in Europe. We had to scratch our heads and say, well, maybe he has a point, Mr. Trump, and maybe we should think about this also in a more strategic and not only in a kind of trade and investment manner. If the United States and Europe get together on this, we represent not quite 50%, but certainly way over 40% of world trade. We are very difficult to ignore, even by China. So I think this is the opportunity to have an impact in Beijing, and to make sure that the relationship can be one at what's the correct word, at eye level, where based on principles of reciprocity. So in that sense, I think we have lots of work ahead, but I am not entirely pessimistic about the opportunity of turning the Chinese issue into a positive transatlantic agenda item.
Let me ask you a sort of cheeky question. Looking back at home, is Hungary overreach for the European Union? Did the EU get too big? Is this part of the problem? Is that now there's a difficulty in coordination and even existential questions about how Europe can function because you've integrated countries that can't really be integrated well?
Look, when countries like Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic, and then later on Romania, Bulgaria, the Baltic states, came to us, came to the United States, came to NATO in the early 1990s and said, we want to be part of your organization. We want to be part of the West. How could we have said no to that? So incorporating, inviting these countries, our direct neighbors, into NATO and certainly also into the EU was undoubtedly the right thing to do. And in those years, if you go back to the 1990s, these countries were totally, absolutely, totally Western. They wanted to be part of the West. What we have now seen over the last decade or so is a development in the United States with the Tea Party, with the developments in the Republican Party, with the victory 4 years ago by Donald Trump. We've seen Marine Le Pen in France. Even in Germany, we have a right-wing party which at times in certain parts of Germany, scored way above 10, 15, almost close to 20% of the vote. So the Hungarians and the Poles are not the only ones who have problems with populist movements, who even have populist parties that are now governing these countries. My point is a very simple one. I think that the values of the European Union and the idea of integration will prevail. And I think that Prime Minister Orban, for example, of Hungary, he's not going to be the Prime Minister of Hungary forever and ever and ever. There will be elections in Hungary. There will be change again in Poland at some point. So I am not in favor of kicking these countries, so to speak, in the butt and kicking them out of the European Union because they have a problem with certain principles of the rule of law or of the independence of the judicial system. I think we need to demonstrate a little bit of strategic patience. We need to put pressure on them. We need to demonstrate to the voters in Poland and Hungary that there is a better way, that there is a European way. So I'm not giving up hope. I'm actually quite optimistic that we will overcome this this crisis within the European Union. Remember, a few years ago, people were saying if the Brits leave the European Union, that will be the
death knell.
The death
Yeah.
of the EU. It will.
And indeed, you could argue it's been the opposite.
Actually, the EU is, in terms of its governance and of its capabilities, of its financial reach, it's in better shape today than was the case 5, 10, or 15 years ago. We had what we call this so-called Hamiltonian moment in last summer, when the EU, as a consequence of the pandemic challenge, decided, after many years of very difficult debate, the EU decided that yes, we have to allow the European Union to go into debt, and that is, of course, that opens a new chapter in the history of the integration of the European Union. So the EU is actually not in bad shape, in spite of Brexit, in spite of the challenges to the rule of law, etc., in a couple of member countries.
Now, you could argue that in terms of pandemic response, the Europeans as a union have shown more strength and capacity to govern at an international level than anybody else.
Yeah, but I'm still not happy. As we pour money into our own economies and societies in order to recover from the pandemic, we should not ignore the needs of the rest of the globe, and that again is something where I would hope that with the incoming Biden administration, we would have a partner in Washington who understands that all of us will only be safe if everyone is safe.
The book is World in Danger, Germany and Europe in an Uncertain Time. Very handsome Wolfgang Ischinger on the cover. Always good to be with you, my friend. Look forward to seeing you soon. I hope in person.
In the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
That's our show this week. Come back next week. Heck, come back next year. And if you like what you see, take a minute to sign up for GZero's most excellent morning newsletter. It's called, you know it, Signal.